The bulk of this unit is spent talking about epithelial tissue. Um, epithelial tissue, like I said before, is going to provide us with membranes and outer layer of our skin and lining cavities. So we'll spend a lot of time on it. And there's a lot of different types of epithelial tissue. So that's why it's the bulk of our unit. So here we go. There are two main types, two main categories or classifications that I can put every type of epithelial tissue into. First type is called membranous or membranous, which we've already talked about. Those are those serous membranes. But there's also different types of membranes, which we'll get to. So we have mucous membranes and cutaneous membranes, and that's a discussion for later in the unit. Then I have glandular epithelium. If you think of a gland, you can think of a sweat gland or a sebaceous gland, which secretes oil, or a thyroid gland or adrenal gland. Right? There's a lot of glands in the body. They're made of glandular epithelium, and we'll have a big discussion about those, like I said, later in the unit. So what does epithelial tissue do? Number one, it provides protection. We discussed this with our membranes, a little layer of protection on the organs lining our cavities, and our skin is actually a membrane. So because that skin is there, it gives us protection. Number two, sensory function. Basically, us being able to have senses. Sorry, in my computer. Pick up stimuli and be able to react to it. Number three, secretion. A lot of products are secreted by glands, which are made of epithelial tissue. So hormones and mucus and digestive juices and sweat. Those are just a few examples of the things that are at our epithelial or specifically glandular epithelium would secrete. Absorption. Remember, this is how we move fluids into our blood, right? So along our respiratory tract and our digestive tract, these things allow us to absorb nutrients and the exchange of gases that allow us to do some really important parts of life. Excretion, sorry, this thing keeps popping up there. Getting rid of wastes is a very big part of epithelial tissue, and we'll see that with our urinary tract. And another really big one that's not on there is these things actually help us play a really important role in homeostasis, help us to maintain an a constant or consistent internal body condition. All right, so how do we break these things down? What are the parts of them, and how do we label them? So there's this thing of every epithelial tissue. Where do I move this guy? Called the basement membrane. The basement membrane is basically the bottom of it, and it connects the tissue to the stuff underneath of it. And I've always kind of compared it to some glue, right? I have my tissue, and then I put a big layer of glue on the very bottom of it, and that sticks it down to the tissue underneath of it. It's usually going to be connected to connective tissue underneath of it. So we'll see that again. I'm going to keep saying that. We'll see that later as we go through farther in the unit. But we have this basement membrane that connects it to everything underneath of it. That basement membrane is going to be produced by both sides, the epithelial tissue on the top and the connective tissue underneath. They kind of help to make that layer that's holding these two tissues together. Along with that, we have these things called integrins. Integrins help to bind the epithelial cells to the basement membrane. So here's the analogy I always gave. Shingles, I used to roof houses. On the shingle, there is a layer of tar on the bottom that helps kind of cement it and waterproof, make sure water can get underneath that shingle. But in addition to the tar, you also nail it into the roof. Okay, so what the heck? Sorry. So the tar would be like the basement membrane holding it down, but then my nails would be like these integrins that I'm helping to secure that layer to the basement membrane. Now I know that's not 100% accurate because the nails are going through the tar and into the wood underneath, but just try to think of that visual in your mind, that these integrins are kind of like these little nails which help hold it to the basement membrane, which hold the whole tissue down altogether. Now the surfaces of the epithelium, I have this thing called the apical or apical surface. That's the free surface, and it opens towards the opening or a lumen. Okay, now what the heck is a lumen? Lumen. I want to do this. See if I can get this in front of the camera. Oh, see my face right through there. Pretend this is a tube running through my body. Let's say it's my esophagus, right? The part of my hand here is epithelial tissue. The opening that you can see my face through is the lumen. Okay, really bad example. I'm sorry. The lumen is just the opening of a gland, of a duct, of an organ, kind of with space in the middle. Okay, but the part of the epithelial tissue that faces the lumen is called the apical surface. So if I'm here looking at this lumen, right? The parts of my fingers that are facing the opening would be the apical surface. Bad example. Sorry. And we'll see more of that in a moment. Okay. The lateral surface is basically where the cells of the epithelial tissues are coming together. So when they're held together side to side, so if my fingers are both, whoa, which way is the camera? Both epithelial tissues, basically that spot, those lines in between my fingers would be like the areas where they're being held together. Now, specifically there, we have these things called desmosomes. Desmosomes form junctions between cells and hold them together side to side. So the integrins hold them down, the desmosomes hold them together side to side. We compare epithelial tissue to floor tiles. If you think of the floor tiles, they're kind of laid side to side and butted up against each other. That's kind of how these epithelial tissues are. And then I have a basal surface. The basal surface is the part facing the basement membrane. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So here we go. I have an apical surface. This part up here would be facing the lumen or the opening. The basal surface is down here, way down by the basement membrane. Okay. Now, simple and stratified, we're going to see those in a minute. But if I could pretend like there's a little thing between these two cells, that'd be those desmosomes holding them together. Now, all epithelial tissues, we say they are avascular. What the heck does avascular mean? That means they have no vasculation. What is vasculation? That means they have no blood vessels. So epithelial tissues technically have no blood supply. But what happens? They get their nutrients by diffusion. So nutrients are able to diffuse through the basement membrane from the tissues underneath. So like I said, they're usually connected to a connective tissue, so that those connective tissues have a blood supply, and then those nutrients are able to just diffuse through there and get to the or get nutrients to the epithelial tissue. And I will stop this video there.